Have you ever had a team of people working on a project together? Perhaps you were training them so that they could do projects with other teams. How would you lead the last team meeting that you were going to have? The last thing you wanted them to remember about how you led them. That's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to see how Jesus responds to that situation when we come right back. Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to help you get more impact from your Bible study. How to study it, how to dig deep, how to mark it in your Bible, and how to apply it to your life. I'm here with my friend Sherry Mangrum, and Sherry and I hope this is a blessing to you as we go. And if it is, we'd ask you to subscribe. Anyway, help us to get to 1,000 subscribers. Hit the like button and let us know what you think in the comments. Love to hear those. And listen, we're going to continue in the book of John. We're getting towards the end. In fact, from chapter 13, verse 1, where we are today, all the way to the end of chapter 17 is all about what Jesus said to his team. The total focus is the last message Jesus had for his men. And we're going to talk about that in detail as we go. Today, we're going to open in chapter 13. We're going to go from verse 1 down to verse 17, talking about an episode that everybody is familiar with, but perhaps haven't looked into in detail. And that is the washing of the feet. We're going to talk about that today as we go. Are you ready?
Yes, I am ready.
Okay. We're going to see what the Lord has for us in this. Now, this first verse has got a lot of great truths in it. So go ahead and read the first verse.
Now, before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end.
Right. Now, and that's basically love them to the uttermost, as much as he could, in other words.
Yes.
Now, there's a couple of interesting things. Number one is this word knowing. The feast of the Passover had come, and we know that's in March or April. Jesus is about to have Passover with his men, the Last Supper, and he knew what was coming. He wasn't just a guy who was going along and all of a sudden he was surprised by his arrest and trial and crucifixion. No, he knew that now is the time when his whole life is going to make sense and is going to be fulfilled. You and I talked about this expression, my hour is not yet come. You remember that all the way back to chapter 2? What I did when he said his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world, or as the hour of his death was coming. I went to chapter 2, verse 4, chapter 7, verse 6, 8, and 30, chapter 12, verse 23 and 27, all the way to the end of this sermon to his men in chapter 17, verse 1. He keeps talking about his hour had not yet come. And then in chapter 17, verse 1, he says, the hour has come. And he gets arrested and sent to the cross. So that's something we've seen through this whole book, of this expression of his hour had not yet come, and now it was at hand, and this is the last chance he has to be with his men. The next significant thing is this word loved. And having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the uttermost. Both of those are agape. They're unconditional love.
Okay.
And love is significant because he is going to use the word love 31 times in 4 chapters. So love is really a theme of what he is talking to his men about. Verse 1 is a footnote from John, saying this is what was going on. This is what Jesus knew. And this is why Jesus is going to have this conversation, because he loved his own and he was about to give his love to the uttermost. Okay.
Yes.
Now, right before the Passover supper starts, this is another footnote. Verse 2, the devil, having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him. If you go all the way back to chapter 6, verse 70 and 71, we aren't going to turn there, but if you went back there, Jesus knew all along that Judas was going to betray him. In fact, he says that one of his disciples was going to betray him and give himself over to the devil's plan. Read verse 3 and 4.
Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, gave up from supper and laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, girded himself.
Now, that's interesting for a couple of reasons. Let's talk about this. Right before supper, he's got his men there, including Judas. He gets up, he takes his clothes off and puts a towel around his waist. He begins to wash their feet. Now, typically, let's back up. Why was washing of the feet a thing? Why did that happen?
They didn't have shoes like we do today,
Okay.
so their sandals would be all they had, and they would get dirty feet.
Even the paved streets, they had animals doing their thing. They had raw sewage out in the streets. People dumped their trash out the windows into the streets. The streets were filthy. And if you walked in the streets, you got all kinds of stuff on your feet. They didn't have shoes that were closed in. They had sandals, and there were no coverings for the feet. So typically, the first thing that happened when a guest would come into your house is you would have their feet washed. What's significant here is this is not the first thing that Jesus did when the disciples arrived. They were ready to have dinner. Then he washes their feet. It wasn't, he washed their feet as they came in the door. And one of the things signifying is the purpose of his washing their feet wasn't just to clean their feet. There's a significance to it that he wants to make the point. This isn't just a greeting and cleaning your feet. This is something more significant, because he doesn't do it when they first come in the door. It was socially unacceptable to not wash the feet when you first came in, because you didn't want to track that stuff into your house. So it was a cultural thing to wash the feet. And typically, it was done by the absolute lowest slave in the house, the slave that had no standing. It wasn't done by the chief steward or one of the higher slaves. This was the dirtiest job in the household. And here, Jesus is about to do that. Now, another thing for us to consider is, in this day and age, and very soon after the first century church, a lot of churches still do feet washing, but it is becoming less and less common because we wear socks. We have coverings that you got to strip off. Women have nylons. It would be a pain to strip off your socks and everything to get your shoes off for the idea of getting your feet clean. Your feet don't need to be cleaned because you're wearing closed shoes and socks. What would be a modern equivalence of washing somebody's feet, Sherry? So in today, somebody comes to your house, what would be the equivalent culturally today of washing their feet?
Asking them if they're thirsty, giving them hospitality.
Okay. Hospitality, but not just being nice and saying, here's a drink. It would be hospitality that would demand the lowest job. It would be like saying, come in, can I make you comfortable? Can I get you something to drink?
Have you?
Can I get you a pillow? Is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable?
Have you? Yes, to serve them.
And to a neighbor, it may be something like going over and mowing a yard to a neighbor that can't physically do it. It's doing something menial that has a lot more significant meaning to it. Now, we're going to see, as we've seen in John before, Jesus is going to start to speak spiritually. And when he does, the disciples think physically. So they're not getting it yet at all. What is Jesus doing before Passover? This wasn't a usual thing for Passover. Pick up at verse 4 and go down to 7.
Got up from supper and laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. Then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. So he came to Simon Peter. He said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet?
It's very interesting. In the Greek, the word you is really emphasized. It would read, so he came to Simon Peter and he said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? You see what he's saying? The emphasis is on the amazed question of, do you wash my feet? Why? So Peter is starting to resist here. And read verse 7.
Jesus answered and said to him, What I do, you do not realize now. You will understand hereafter.
So John is recording this fact that the disciples didn't get it. Peter certainly didn't get it. And he's resisting Jesus' leadership. Now, I made a note over here. This washing of the feet is the master served as the lowly slave, not giving up position. He was still the master, demonstrating an attitude of service, not power. So Jesus is not, boy, you're so lucky to be with me for this meeting. No, he takes on this servant attitude, even though he still remained. He didn't give up being the Lord. He was still the Lord, but he had an attitude of service, and that's his leadership style. Jesus led by serving. He was a teacher and he taught. Sometimes he corrected, sometimes he disciplined. But overall, everything he did humbly as a servant leader. So he's going to start his last meeting by showing his authority in serving. Something for us to think about how we conduct our meetings. Right?
Absolutely.
And Peter, of course, is not getting it. So then read down from verse 8 to verse 10.
Peter said to him, Never shall you wash my feet. Jesus answered him, If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, then wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, He who has bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you.
All right. This is where Jesus is starting to talk spiritually, and they're thinking physically. Peter is definitely thinking physically where he says, you're not going to wash my feet. And basically Jesus says, I have to do this. I have to serve you or we don't have fellowship. He's not saying you're not a member of the team. He's basically says, we can't really have fellowship unless you allow me to serve you. And the ultimate service is going to be, he's going to die for him.
Could this be considered communion together?
No, it's not in the context of communion because he hasn't gone into Passover yet. This is before Passover. So he's basically talking about being with him, saying, we are a group of servants. And if you refuse to be served, you're not going to be ready to serve.
Okay.
And there are people that this idea of, I don't want to serve, I want to be served. You need to watch out. Are you really approaching the team with the attitude that Jesus was showing? The lesson that Jesus is trying to communicate here is we leaders need to be humble and serve so that other people will get the idea and serve. So he's
Yes.
really talking about fellowship on the team. Now, he's going to say something here that does have significance that has been taken out of context many times. This is Jesus said to him, listen, if you've bathed, I'll only wash your feet. But you're completely clean if you've washed for the day, but not all of you. Jesus is talking more about the spiritual condition of being washed in the blood of Christ. He said, he who has bathed, once you've been cleaned by salvation, you've been cleansed by the blood, you only need to wash your feet as that occasional sin dirties your path. So just confess, clean your feet, and get back on a clean path, because you, as being saved, you're completely clean. You just need your feet washed. You are clean. And then he says, but not all of you. Now, there have been people that talk about those verses as baptism, that if you're not baptized, you're not saved, and you have to be baptized to be saved. Baptism is not in the picture here. He's basically just washing feet as a symbol of service. And then he starts to talk about the fact that when Peter says, oh, then wash me all over. That's Peter. And the Lord kind of rolled his eyes and said, no, Peter, Peter, calm down. If you've been bathed in the team, you don't need to be washed all over. I'm just washing your feet here to make your way clean as a point of service. And Peter and the apostles are thinking physically, how many times do I have to wash? Wash me all over then. And washing is not the same as washing somebody's feet. Washing myself is not service to others.
Yes.
All right. He continues on with this spiritual level of communication.
Yeah,
The
because
disciples start
that
getting-
song, Are You Washed in the Blood of the Lamb, would make no sense.
Once you're washed in the blood of the Lamb,
You're washed.
then all you have to do is occasional confession of the dirt you pick up by walking the way. But you're completely saved in that you're completely clean in the salvation and fellowship that you are in.
Praise
And when
the
he says,
Lord.
but when not all of you, this is one of the indications that a lot of scholars believe that Judas was not saved and had never fully embraced who Jesus was and was not cleaned. He was not washed by the blood. So Jesus basically saying there is one who is not washed, is not completely cleaned,
Okay.
is not saved.
That makes sense.
And he says that about Judas a number of times. He says Judas is an agent of Satan, and he makes it clear that Judas was probably not saved. Now, it says in verse 12, so, this is back to the narrative, when Jesus had washed their feet and taken his garments and basically reclined back at table, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? Now, I circled the word so you can cheat by looking at my notes, but do you see his question? Do you know what I have done to you?
Yes.
Do you notice that he does not say, do you know what I have done for you? Because the whole purpose of washing the feet wasn't for the disciples to be clean. It was to show the disciples how to clean other people's feet. So Jesus' question is, do you know what I did to you? And what I did to you was show you that you need to have clean feet, but you need to clean other people's feet the way I have done. What I have done to you is lowered your expectation of leadership to the point of humble service, not lording it over people. That's an interesting question he asks. And this is basically, he's getting to this point of, now, are you guys thinking spiritually? Because I'm talking spiritually here. And of course, they aren't yet. But let's get down to the last few sentences here. Read verse 13 or 14.
You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet.
See, that's what I was saying. What he has done to them, he has shown them that even though he is the teacher and the Lord, and that's a position he doesn't give up, but as teacher and Lord, he serves. In verse 14, you ought to wash one another's feet. So the idea of washing the other guy's feet. He says, you call me teacher and Lord. I wrote underneath there, do I do that? That is a significant question to ask ourselves. Do I call Jesus teacher only? Oh, he's a good teacher. He says good things. I like to follow some of the principles he teaches. I follow him as teacher and Lord of my life. And he says, you guys treat me as teacher and Lord, and you're right, because I am. If I'm your teacher and your Lord, you need to follow my example of serving others. So we can stop and ask ourselves, what are the opportunities I have to humbly serve other people?
Yes.
It's not the action, it's the attitude Jesus is looking for here. And so I can ask myself the questions, how can I humbly serve people? Even if they become uncomfortable, I really shouldn't be the pastor who goes out of his way to serve other people. Instead of saying, hey, we need a committee to do that. I'm the pastor. I don't vacuum the floors. See what I'm saying?
Right.
So it goes back, and we can finish this out now, because he says in 15, I gave you an example so that you also should do as I did to you. Do you see that again?
Yes.
He does not say that I did for you. What difference does that make to me? To do it for me would give the idea of this is something that he needed to do to make me better or to make me whole or something like that. To do it to me, he is doing it as an action to affect me.
Yes.
Not to benefit me.
Yes.
And we want to be leaders who look to be serving people to affect them in a way of seeing humility and service, not to benefit us.
Yeah.
I'm doing this to show humility. Okay.
And in 13, he says, you call me teacher and Lord. Then in 14, he reverses it. If I then, the Lord and the teacher.
That's an interesting thing to think about, because the roles, you call me teacher and Lord, but the first position that Jesus should have is not teacher. The first position in your life as a believer is he should be your Lord. As the Lord, he is teaching you. So from that aspect, that can be an interesting application in your life. To get up in the morning and say, Lord, please teach me today what you want me to do. No, it's Lord, you tell me today what you want me to do. You're my Lord. And then in the doing, teach me.
I like that.
See?
Yes.
So this is, as an example, serve as I have served you. We need to be saying, oh, if Jesus served me, I deserve to follow his example and serve others. And then verse 16 and 17, read those together.
Truly, truly, I say to you, A slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them.
Now, verse 16 is not true. If we're talking on the physical level, is it true that the slave is as great as the master? No, but on the spiritual level that Jesus is talking, it's absolutely correct in that both of these human beings, whether they're slave or master, equal before God. Nobody's got rights to be superior as a human being. We
Yeah.
all stand before God. And
That's
we're
right.
not, and the one who sends is no greater than the one who is sent. In other words, the lowly messenger is not less of a human being than the important message that was delivered by the sender. So Jesus, again, is speaking. If he's speaking on a physical term, he's wrong. But on a spiritual term, he's right. And the
Yes.
command really is, if you get this, guys, and not, they don't get it right then, but they do get it later when they have the Holy Spirit's help. They start to understand what's happening here. And that's why John is really including it so significantly, and why I wanted to really talk about it with us.
Yes.
What does the last verse say again? Let's look at verse 17.
If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them.
Flip over to James chapter 1, verse 22 to 25.
But prove yourselves to be doers of the word and not merely hearers who delude themselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks at his natural face in a mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he was.
James is saying the same thing here that Jesus is saying. You need to get the spiritual lesson. Power of authority to lead, leadership, means service.
Yes.
Leadership does not mean position and power and demand for other people to serve you. That's the world. But spiritually, leadership means service. And that's what we see with the washing of the feet. Romans chapter 12, verse 3 says, we need to consider others more important than ourselves.
Yes.
And later in 1 Timothy chapter 5, when it talks about the qualifications for a godly woman, was one who washed the feet of the saints. Now, that didn't mean she went around and just washed every foot out there, but this idea of humbly served. And we see that as the lesson for us to take away. So we can stop quietly now and consider, is he my Lord and teacher? Do I want to follow him in the leadership style of service as the most humble position, serving others as more important than themselves?
Yeah.
Can bring us to some real life-changing decisions if we take it to heart.
Yes.
Today we've been talking about leadership of a team. I want to recommend a video to you. It's called 5 Steps to Being on Jesus' Team. It's out of the 3rd chapter of Mark, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you do, hit the subscribe button and the like button. That helps us with YouTube. And we're going to continue our study next week. Until then, God bless you.